everyone, welcome to the 14 Wins podcast. I'm Bones, and with us we have Rom X, of course.
Hey, everybody.
And what we're going to discuss on this episode are the trends we find in UFO cases that point to the ET phenomenon hypothesis. And then we'll go from there. We'll talk about some current events on the topic.
Yeah, fortunately for us, the current events in the news fit right into the ET hypothesis. And by ET, we mean extraterrestrial. Then we mean something from another planet. So one of the popular theories is Mars, for example. Maybe this phenomenon began on Mars, and we are a product of that civilization here. So that's just one example. But for an ET hypothesis to work, we need it to work with the trends that we saw in the cases. So what's funny about the ET hypothesis is that all of us start out thinking these things are extraterrestrial. I certainly did. I went down the path of thinking these are extraterrestrial for over a year.
And meaning that they're not from Earth.
Right. And I specifically assumed they were from another planet.
Right.
And that what I was seeing was spaceships. And I think then you notice the frequency of these ships. You look at the amount of distance that it would take to go from here to there. And you assume, okay, they're probably moving through a Stargate because that's a long distance. And we can think of ways theoretically that you could travel faster than light. And they could be doing any one of those. So you assume they're coming from another place. And I think you assume that a Stargate or a portal is involved. And there's some evidence that's happening all around the UFO phenomenon right now that kind of points to portal and Stargate happening, Skinwalker Ranch being one place. But there's other places where, like Mount Shasta in California, Mount Hayes in Alaska. These are places where people believe there is some sort of portal or Stargate happening.
Right.
We're seeing a lot of physicists come out with papers about that. So that could be part of disclosure. But a Stargate could easily be an interdimensional portal. So again, we're just not, that's not a smoking gun, but that would be most likely how they'd be moving through, I think, according to a basic logic or a normal research path. You would go down the path of going, oh, they're ETs, because our fiction says they're ETs, right?
Right.
When you first heard about UFOs, where'd you think they were from?
It always starts with Mars because it's just the closest planet, and so we're with fiction, you always hear about Martians. The term Martian, it's always Mars.
So you thought Mars or some other planet? I mean, you immediately thought our own galaxy, but
sure.
It could literally be anywhere in the universe, right? So. Right. We don't know, but that's your immediate assumption because of our fiction. So we've sort of been led to believe that. And there have been a number of cases where these things have said they're from outer space. Perhaps the most famous alien abduction case is Betty and Barney Hill. And guess what former President Obama is working on now? A documentary about Betty and Barney Hill.
What? Okay.
Why would a former president be making a documentary about something that didn't happen?
Right.
So the aliens, we'll call them in that case, said they were from a specific place, and that's just one example. But then there were a number of examples. So aliens showed up looking different and saying they were from other places in cases that met all of our standards of credible evidence. And this is, we talked about how UFO research is conducted in the last podcast, but it's conducted by looking at cases. So with the cases that we looked at deemed credible, the trends were that the ships looked different. The trends were that the aliens looked different.
Right.
So that leads you to start to believe, okay, we're either being visited by a variety of different species, or this is one species looking in a lot of different ways. And when you consider the fact that it's a variety of different species that are visiting us, and this is a theory that some people hold. There's even a former Israeli space chief, Hayam Mashad, who came out and said something to this effect, that there's a galactic federation out there, and we've been interacting with it. So I call all of these theories the Galactic Federation theory. And the big hang up I have with it is that all of these things seem to be abiding by the same rules of secrecy and engagement.
Right, true.
So now we have to believe that we're being visited by a variety of species that are all bipedal and humanoid, which you lost me right there.
Right.
Because the odds of us bumping into one bipedal humanoid extraterrestrial species is pretty low. The obvious, and that's arguable. People have argued, oh no, it's actually quite a natural form, but I won't get into that. I'll just say that us bumping in an entire coalition of the bipedal humanoid, praying mantis, reptilian, gray alien federation seems extremely unlikely to me.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and you also have different theories on propulsion too. I mean, what accounts for the variation in that? You know, you have the different shapes of craft.
Yeah, great point. I mean, you have different types of craft showing up that are looking all sorts of different ways. And what the first thing I was most interested in how UFOs flew when I started. So the first thing that brought me into the idea that I was looking at something completely different, as Monty Python would say, was that I started to notice credible cases where the propulsion seemed different. The propulsion mechanism seemed different. And you could say one craft can have more than one means of propulsion, and it seems like in some cases that's true. But in other cases, there was fire shooting out of the bottom.
Yeah, right. Interesting.
There's no reason for fire to be shooting out of that aircraft. That's a display of some sort.
Right, right.
And I guess I'm not an expert on alien technology, but I don't know why something that's showing anti-gravity capabilities would have to shoot fire out as it jettisons toward the sky.
Right.
Doesn't seem to make sense.
No, and that would be evidence of some type of material fuel that's being used, which is finite.
Right. In that case, it looks like it's doing what we think it's doing, which is putting on displays.
Right.
That we say the government's performative. The phenomenon's really performative.
Right.
So it's the behavior of these entities too. You know, not just the variance in the craft and the shapes of the entities. It's the behavior. The behavior of these entities is wildly different too. The overwhelming feeling that abductees have about their captors seemingly is ambivalence. And it's more that coldness of a scientist or a farmer going about its business.
Right.
And then there's malevolence, where the phenomenon, there's a bunch of cases in Colares, Brazil, where these things came down and were attacking people. They were shooting them with rays. People were having all sorts, similar effects to what we discussed in Havana syndrome. If you turned up a low frequency, wave or a high frequency wave, whatever wave they were doing it with, they were doing it with light and energy, and they were causing harm to all the citizens of Colares, Brazil. That's the worst case. Whenever people come out with what I would call the peaceful space bro hypothesis,
right?
And it's referred to that a lot in the UFO research community. I think it's pretty funny.
Space bro.
Yeah, peaceful space bros. And this is an idea that some pretty big UFO influencers are pushing. I don't know where they got the idea. And these are people who claim to have the keys. And they say these things are extraterrestrial. And they are waiting for us to be more civilized in order to engage with us.
Right. And perhaps they're trying to make a comparison between human evolution, and they're thinking that's since they could be a civilization that's millions of years ahead of us, they naturally progress to a heightened state where they wouldn't be violent.
Right. So to move, we're technically a type 2 civilization now, I guess. A type 3 civilization. We wouldn't have these energy concerns. We'd be
Right.
more advanced. We'd be more advanced culturally. And I think, as many people have noticed, we've grown by leaps and bounds technologically over the last 100 years. I mean, we went from the Wright brothers to now,
Right.
like this is insanely fast. And then the rest of human history was horse and cart. So
Right.
there's no way our culture has caught up. We're still the same people that were fighting each other in castles.
Yeah.
We just have much cooler stuff now. So the idea is we need to catch up, right? We need to catch up with our society, and we do. I think we all realize that. But the idea that we need to do that in order for these things to engage with us doesn't hold water with me, because they're already engaging with us, and they have been for thousands of years. So you'd have to still explain abductions, you'd have to still explain all of these interactions. And they're often explained by people proposing the peaceful space bro hypothesis by something that the aliens told them. And they can't provide a recording or a document that we could all verify.
Yeah, right.
It's just another person with a message from space. I mean, I guess you could, and they get hundreds of thousands of people believing them. So that's much more popular than 4chan wins. So that peaceful space bro hypothesis doesn't hold a lot of water with me. And the Galactic Federation hypothesis doesn't hold a water with me. But they're usually mentioned in the same breath.
Oh, okay.
And what a good ET hypothesis has to contain is all the things we started to notice when we opened our eyes and said, okay, what if the phenomenon's not ET? And then we noticed a whole bunch of stuff. And so did J. Allen Hynek, who was the chief scientist on Project Blue Book. And he ran into a bunch of government stonewalls, just the same way Congress is doing today when he was a chief scientist on Project Blue Book. And he said there's something else going on here. And what they wanted him to do was basically say there's not much to the UFO topic, which is what the other supposedly objective studies had done. And Hynek did his best to do some good research. They did find some real cases in Project Blue Book, but that's it. That's all they were allowed to find. So Hynek went on, and he became a UFO researcher in his post-Blue Book career. And he was the first one that I think really established high strangeness among established scientists. So high strangeness is all of those things that come with the UFO phenomenon that no one likes, which is poltergeist activity, the hitchhiker effect, the relationship between this UFO phenomenon and things like fairies and jinns and kami from lore, the relationship between ancient aliens theories and this phenomenon. These are things no one really likes about this phenomenon, but they're all part of it. So Hynek kind of lumped all of that in with high strangeness. And that includes consciousness as well. The consciousness aspects of this phenomenon. And those are things that make me struggle with the extraterrestrial hypothesis. However, there's a couple of ways that I think they fit. And they're actually some of my favorite theories about what this phenomenon is. So the first one, and my favorite ET hypothesis about what this UAP phenomenon is that it's a von Neumann probe. And a von Neumann probe is basically a probe that contains all of the elements to both begin life as it is on your planet and the elements to bring your civilization forward. So that's a pretty good theory. And it would make a lot of sense. And I think that this is a theory that some pretty big scientists that we've mentioned are holding pretty close. So I pay attention to this one. It would make a lot of sense in what the paper that that I just worked on, which is the paper about cryptid and how and why these cryptid sightings keep happening. And the conclusion that I came to, most likely option, was they're a form of control. And that was also Jacques Vallée's theory on what this phenomenon is doing, that it's a control mechanism. So the idea that this is a von Neumann probe that might be guiding our civilization in some way fits very nicely with Vallée's theory. And then part of that probe could be spawning these quote-unquote aliens, or NHI, which are interacting with us in ways that the probe designates necessary. That would explain some of the biological extractions. Or maybe they're not extracting something. Maybe they're adding something during these abductions. So this is an ET theory I really like. It would also explain how this phenomenon seems able to materialize whatever ships it needs, how it's able to materialize whatever occupants, UFO nauts that it needs. It would explain how it's able to metamorphosize things. It would explain why it appears as fairies and cryptids, because it's interacting with us in ways that it's have an intended effect on society.
Interesting, yeah.
It would also explain how it follows strict rules of secrecy and engagement. It's following some sort of program. It does seem to have this, whether we're dealing with multiple intelligences, and I think we are, these things seem to have an understanding and an ability to emulate the human psyche.
Well, when is it going to show up and give us some new technology on dealing with our energy crisis, and our water shortage?
That's often a part of the peaceful space bro hypothesis.
Ah, okay.
The peaceful space bro hypothesis is proposing that whatever is in those UAP craft that the government is holding on to would unlock the keys to free energy.
Ah, okay.
And therefore, they're holding it tight because they want to remain in control of all the options of energy. That's a pretty good hypothesis. I don't know what's in that craft. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, come on, bro. Okay, then you just say, oh, all right. You crack open a beer and then we go on.
And this can get us into some things that I don't like about the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Because if it did give us these UFOs or UAPs, then it knows that the government has it. And if these things are multiple intelligences, which I think they are, then they know that the government's in possession of their bodies. And there's very good evidence that when they took possession of those bodies, some of them were alive. So why didn't their bros come down and get them?
Right.
This phenomenon seems way more powerful than us. Why didn't it come get its ships?
Right.
So these are parts that I don't really think match up so well with the idea that it's a bunch of extraterrestrials and ships. If they didn't want us to have their stuff, they could just come get it. Or demand it back by vaporizing an island.
Right.
So they never bothered to do that. Whatever they've given us, and I'm using those words intentionally, it's been given to the government, and you got to wonder why. So John Keel thought this phenomenon was up to no good, and he went down the ET road and then turned, and it was his work that turned me as well. But I still like that von Neumann probe. And that wasn't something I think John spent a lot of time on.
But I mean, to go back, we were talking about, why do they act the way they do? There are some abductees that report on the coldness of these these characters that they're confronted with, that they're being analyzed in some sort of way, and we assume that they're more advanced. We always do, and technologically, obviously, but socially and culturally, we don't know. And I think in previous episodes, I remember you mentioned something about, maybe it was, or we were just talking about, maybe it's a civilization that just clued in on a certain way of traveling before they really evolved socially.
Right. So I think that like there's a possibility here that they developed a technology based on a fundamental force that we haven't. So we've focused a lot of our technology on electricity, obviously, and wires are meant to carry electricity. They may have figured out the means to utilize a fundamental force that we don't understand, like time or gravity.
Right.
Like, time is more fundamental than gravity, so it would probably be likely gravity, but potentially if you could manipulate gravity, you can manipulate time. So that would make a lot of sense. And if they're an ET civilization that mastered something like that, they could be, absolutely coming here from way far away. And then it would make a lot of sense with what people report in encounters and abductions, which I guess we'll just characterize as time disruptions. But that's when people think they've been gone for an hour and they've been gone for 4 days.
Oh, right.
And vice versa.
Yeah, when you think about I think about just because we naturally make parallels between the ET and ourselves, and if they did come across some type of technology early in their civilization, they would be looking for a meaning in totally different ways. If they're able to skip through time and space, their whole value system is so much different.
Yeah, in terms of their motives, I don't even think we go down that road too much.
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
Right. What we like to do at 4TN Wins is we prefer to look at these cases, especially since we try to analyze them more like a court would. We like to look at it as behavioral profiling. So when we do behavioral profiling, we're trying to understand what these engagements would look like if it was a person. Right?
Right.
So if it was a person doing this to you, what would they want? I believe the overwhelming feeling we got from the phenomenon was that it was a resource and either farmer or scientist or researcher dynamic. So the overwhelming idea that was that humans are a resource of some sort. And that would explain why it doesn't destroy us, because it clearly seems capable. And it's nice to hear that they can shoot down UAPs, but there's a whole lot more to this phenomenon. And I don't even know if they understand the full scope of it. I don't know that any of us do.
Right.
So these things seem to be able to either see through time or move backward and forward in time. And I would point to the Nimitz encounter as one example of that. The pilot said they knew where the rendezvous or cap point was prior to the pilots knowing where it was. And the object went there prior to them. So it either saw through time or popped over into that moment in time, saw what was going to happen, and then came back to this moment and decided to change it. All of that could be accomplished through technology. I mean, we can theorize ways that that's possible. It also kind of leads us toward the interdimensional idea, and this is where it gets a little mixed up in between ET and interdimensional, because if they have that sort of capability, if they can move through time, it almost makes them interdimensional in nature, which is why we have that's why we have 14 Winds like to say this thing could be from another planet, this planet, or another dimension, but it has an interdimensional aspect to it.
Right.
And that's what we mean by that. But I do like the von Neumann probe idea a lot. And I know Avi Loeb and Gary Nolan are working on a paper that I'm looking forward to reading about that idea. And I think it's because they're looking at the same evidence we are and going, oh, how do we make this fit with ET? And that's why Avi Loeb is looking at spheroids in the bottom of the ocean.
Ah, yes. So He's the chap from Harvard, right? The Harvard physicist.
Yeah, he's the Harvard Chair of Astrophysics, and he's been looking at done a private expedition to check out these spheroids at the bottom of the ocean that he thinks may be part of an alien ship. But so far, there's a pretty lukewarm reaction from people who study that stuff all the time, and they're basically saying, sure, it could be, but this is also what we would see if it was a regular comet at this point.
Oh, okay.
So turnabout is fair play. Avi Loeb threw some cold water on those Ukrainian scientists' paper about the UAP that they were seeing over their observatory. And now he's getting cold water thrown on his, but that's how peer review works. And I got to tell you, those Ukrainian scientists came back with a response to all that, and it looks like to this amateur, they did just fine with defending their work, and they are seeing a ton of UAP over the Ukraine.
So yeah, one of the big questions that I have, and a lot of people have, is the question of why. Why would they come here, and why would they all engage in kind of the same methods of secrecy?
Right. And that's why we bring up those cases like we talked about the Kentucky Goblins episode 2. And those cases are so absurd that they don't really make sense for any civilization to be coming here and getting anything out of that engagement.
Right.
If you're advanced enough to get here, you're advanced enough to engage with us in a way that's going to be productive.
Right.
And so the phenomenon either was playing with us in that sense, in that Kentucky Goblins incident, or it was getting something out of it. And if it was getting something out of it, what was it getting? I think that's really important. It was getting these ideas into the culture. And we talked about how it got the little green men idea into the culture, and it got the little space alien idea into the culture.
Right.
And that was the beginning of it. This phenomenon started coming on as looking extraterrestrial at that time. We pointed out, and Valet points out, he's got a ton of evidence there. So when there's a mountain of evidence like that, we find at least 5 credible cases in it, we don't have to go through all of it to say, these things were showing up looking like fairies. So are they fairies or are they ETs? Is this their final form, as it were?
Right.
So we don't know, but there's a metamorphosis happening here. There's a change that has happened over time. And right around that time of the Kentucky Goblins is when this thing starts saying, okay, showing up as it introduces the idea of extraterrestrials. Maybe it thought we were ready. Maybe it's preparing us. But that's where I like the von Neumann probe idea. But maybe not. It might be playing with us. That was more John Keel's idea. And he went towards some different ideas about where this phenomenon is from, which we're going to follow.
Okay, right on. Well, that pretty much wraps up our extraterrestrial hypothesis episode. The next episode will be, we'll look into the crypto-terrestrial theory, and then after that, interdimensional, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Everyone, thank you again for listening.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Catch you on the next one.